So Grayson is joining me from Gatsby, and we wanted to do a quick shout out because GatsbyConf is coming up very soon, March 2nd and 3rd. It's amazing logo, by the way. I don't know where you guys get your designers, but
Oh,
they rock.
they're amazing. I think this is Flo. I think Flo did the design here, and Flo Kissling, and then Paul Scanlon built the site and did an amazing job with 3JS. He actually has a great blog post out of how he built the site and
Oh
with
yeah.
good, yeah, 3JS and Gatsby.
Definitely go check out GatsbyConf if you're interested. You can register. There will probably be, I think last time you guys hosted it was around like 4,000 devs were floating around. It's a really great conference. I recommend it. And we're going to talk all about Gatsby version 4 in the rest of the show. So join us.
Awesome.
Welcome back, peeps, to Perfect.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks. Now with your amazing hosts, Alex Patterson and Brittany Postma. This episode is sponsored by Builder.io. Visually build on your tech stack. Welcome back, perfect peeps, to Perfect.dev. Today we're talking all about powering up with Gatsby 4, and GatsbyConf should be coming out right when this post comes out. And with us today we have Grayson Hicks, who is a developer advocate at Gatsby. Hey, Grayson.
Hey, everybody.
Grayson, do you want to fill us in a little more on your background and how you kind of found your way onto the Gatsby team?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I used to build websites in high school. Like I messed around with a computer a lot in high school, but then when college came, I don't know, I just didn't really think of computers as a career, I guess, and so I went and did something totally unrelated, and then got kind of a random career started after college in finance, and after a few years, just like kind of my wife said, did you ever think you'd be doing this? And I said no. And so I kind of reevaluated my life priorities and what I wanted to do, and I was like, I used to really enjoy coding. I wonder if I could transition into a career. So I just did nights and weekends type stuff while I was working, and eventually got to the point where I felt like I could make the leap into full-time dev. And so that was probably like 6 or 7 years ago. And luckily I got into React like very early on recommendation of some people. So I was doing React before Create React app. I was using React
Oh, wow.
with Backbone JS and
Wow.
yeah, the old
Early days.
yeah, like real MVC architecture on the front end. And so got into React, and then heard about Gatsby. So I've been using Gatsby for quite a while. I've been working with Gatsby Inc. for just over a year. But yeah, I really love. I try really hard to not be jaded or anything like that, or over opinionated when it comes to tech stack. So like I'm like everybody can fit in. Like bring what works with you. I'm not one of those that like bashes whatever someone chooses to build with, But
That's one of the things I love the most about tech, though, is that you have so many unconventional paths. No one has the same story. And you hear that a lot where people transition from something else because they didn't realize you could do this for a job, because it's incredible. But I love hearing those unconventional stories.
yeah, I think I definitely had the impression of if I didn't get a CS degree, like that I couldn't do coding for a job. And so glad to know that that's not true.
Yeah, it's definitely
I hear
not
that so often. I was kind of curious from the Gatsby standpoint. Did you do like a lot of open source type work on Gatsby before you kind of made it onto the team? What did that look like for you?
Well, yeah, good question. So before Gatsby, I was at an agency that was primarily Drupal focused. So we had a lot of enterprise clients, like higher ed, government clients. Big Drupal tends to power like pretty big websites. And there's been a movement within Drupal and all these other CMSs of like a headless, supporting headless solution. So not using Drupal templates, but letting Vue or Svelte or React power your front end. So we were exploring different front ends, and we decided to use Gatsby. So we built a few sites with Gatsby, and so we're contributing back a lot to Gatsby plus Drupal ecosystem. I was giving some talks at some Drupal camps on Gatsby. So I was filing issues, commenting on issues, small PRs for docs, but nothing like giant feature PRs or anything. It was more I was doing a lot, I guess, to educate people on React, because it's even within the front end world, like there's segments, right? Like there's people that you just assume, oh, everyone knows React at this point. No, like there are people, especially when these full stack CMSs where the JavaScript you need to know is like, jQuery sometimes to make a component like slightly interactive, but for the most part, you don't really need it. Like they have really robust template system where you don't need to know JSX or all this stuff. So at the Drupal agency, there were a lot of teammates that were like, they wanted to learn React. And so we had a lot of great initiatives. And I think Gatsby's a great intro for someone that wants to learn React. It's a great like toolbox to use.
You must have gotten like tons of Gatsby socks then with all
I was gonna say that.
I have like 4 Gatsby t-shirts. My wife snags some whenever I get a new one.
No cool socks.
I didn't do the socks. I had a choice. I remember when you did the first PR, which I thought was so cool at the time.
Yeah.
And I chose a t-shirt.
I thought it was a great way to help get open source contributors to help maintain it.
Yeah.
I'm working through that right now at work, and it's like we need the same thing. Gatsby did it so well. It was so impressive.
I think we're doing water bottles now, like metal reusable water bottles.
Oh, nice. For your first PR?
I know. I think that was we had like a swag giveaway for like the month of December.
Nice.
But yeah, I got the hoodie now for working here, and a hat, and I think I get a vest or something for 1 year coming soon, something like that. I don't know.
Gatsby swag as you go up the chain.
I'm not a huge like dev swag collector. I know some people like to get a little bit from everyone. I've got enough t-shirts and stuff around my house.
I'm starting to think of creative things to do with my t-shirts. We'll see one of these days.
I saw somebody they do like t-shirt quilts or t-shirt blanket or something. You can.
Well, okay, maybe I won't do that after all.
Yeah,
I've heard of that.
I've been talking with my mom about it. Sorry, I've completely gone off the rails.
We've derailed.
So yeah, the main reason we brought you on, obviously, was to talk about some of the new changes in Gatsby 4. So Gatsby 3, I think I have in my notes, came out in March of 2021, and then somewhat rather quickly, Gatsby 4 was released in October of 21.
Yeah.
And as we're recording this, I think we're up to like 4.5-ish.
Yep.
But I'd love to cover some of the main topics as I lose my voice. Hang on one sec. Today's podcast is brought to you by Builder.io, visually building the web. Builder.io has one of the most powerful visual editors in the industry. Unlike other tools, Builder actually produces the code for you. You don't have to completely switch out your framework either, just use one of the handy SDKs that are available. There's no limits to what you can build. Instead of limiting your marketing team, start to optimize and let them do the work. This will allow your web developers to get back to the hard work that it takes for other components, allowing your team to do A/B testing and personalization. Stop worrying about bugs in production. Just use the site as it is, then you can analyze and start converting all of your customers with Builder's built-in heat maps. Stop limiting your growth with developers' long lead times. Start building, optimizing, analyzing, and start growing faster. Don't take my word for it. You can sign up for free today and start building the web visually with Builder.io. Okay, I'm back. I'd love to cover some of the main items that came out in Gatsby 4 because I feel like it was a pretty decent change to the system. And I have some of the release notes. I just want to pop up real quick of the items that were released just to kind of remember what's out here, of course. So there's a nice migration guide that we've put in the notes for everyone if you want to check that out. But the first item on here is parallel query running. Can we talk a little bit more about kind of what that means and how it used to be built in as like Redux in the build chain and then changed?
Yeah. Do you mind first if we go? I want to go back to that release cadence because I think that's like a really important thing that that Gatsby improved upon. So back in like the Gatsby 2 era, I would say, it was more unstructured as far as releases, right? There was definitely some kind of pattern, but it wasn't quite as predictable. So then Gatsby 3 was released in March of last year. And we always kind of said, hey, this is going to be a stepping stone release. Like it's a major because things are going to break, but we have some big ideas and this is going to help us get there. But we've got to have like kind of an incremental jump there. But really in like late 2.0, we started this new release cadence, which is like every 2 weeks you get a new minor, basically, right? Like, or maybe it's every month, something like that. But it's a very clean process. So I don't think we're gonna expect such a quick jump to like a 5.0 or anything like that. Sure. So I don't want people to get that impression that it's moving. I think there's probably like a 9-month window where it's like, wow, it's moving really fast. It went from a 2 to a 4 in 9 months. Yeah, but like it was planned and like we had to break some stuff along the way to make some of these improvements, but it's overall like a really nice, clean, predictable release pattern now. So one of the big things.
Yeah, just as a reminder for those who might be new to dev, what we're talking about, SEM versions, semantic versioning. There's a major, a minor, and then a patch, I believe, right? So if you see like 4.3.1, the 4 is going to be the major, 3 is the minor, and that's what Grayson's talking about with these minor versions.
Yep.
Sorry, I totally interrupted you. Keep going.
Yep, that's totally right. So, so one of the biggest parts of this is parallel query running. So, a lot of the 4.0 stuff came out behind a flag in like the late 3.0 versions, but it just turned on by default in the 4.0 version. So parallel query running, what that is when you build a Gatsby site, you're going to create this GraphQL server that is there at build time to get your data for the templates, right? So you have to run queries against the GraphQL server to inject the data into your template. So instead of say like writing your own fetch to your CMS and like putting it in through props, Gatsby has this GraphQL query pattern where you just put a query at the bottom of your page template and that data automatically gets injected into the template for you to use. Before parallel query running, when you got to that step in the process where Gatsby is running those queries, it would happen on one core of your computer, one at a time. So if you have a really beefed up M1 with 8 cores, like your query running step is going to be the same as someone that had like theoretically a 1 or 2 core of the same chip, right? Like it's only using one of them. So we now with parallel query running, those queries happen in parallel. So if it now uses n-1 number of cores, so if you have 8 cores, it's going to utilize 7, right? So I think the default is 4 for most people. It tries to use 4, but so that can speed up that step quite a lot.
So if we talk about that on a build server, let's say, is there a way to like beef up build servers to kind of take that utilization? I know you guys are doing a lot in the cloud now, as far as build too. Is that something you guys have realized you should be running an M1 or something up there too?
Oh, I mean, I would love for there to be like an M1 tier on all these build platforms. I have I have one locally, and it's like it's so fast. But yeah, that's absolutely right. Like the more resources you throw at it, the faster your build will be. Yeah. So, and there's like a really big fundamental change that had to happen for parallel query running to be possible. And I don't know if you go back to the release notes. I don't know if it mentions this separately. If it does, we'll cover it separately. But no, it doesn't. Okay, so in order for parallel query running to happen, before parallel query running, all of the data, you kind of mentioned this earlier, all of the data for those queries was stored in Redux. So Gatsby had like an internal Redux store as part of the build process, and it would query against Redux, and so there was lots of limitations for performance when it came to being able to even do that in parallel, and then how fast could you possibly do it. So we've switched to storing the data into something called LMDB, which is an open source tool. It stands for like Lightning Mapped Memory Database, something like that. I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what LMDB does and how it does it. What I do know is it's a place we can store our data and we can query it in parallel, right? Without worrying about async issues or anything like that. So and it's very, very fast. So now under the hood, Gatsby stores all that data, not in Redux, but in LMDB.
So is that there was a dependency, I believe, in 4 to run on Node 14? Is that because of that LMDB side?
Yep. So LMDB requires Node 14. So Gatsby 4 requires Node 14.
Gotcha. Totally makes sense. So if from a person like me who only writes front end and doesn't really understand all the builds, kind of, if I were to look at that and say, okay, this is cool, it's all going to go faster, is there a specific way I should design my like architecture within Gatsby to say my e-commerce pages need to look like X and my blog pages need to look like Y so that they actually build correctly? Or is it just like magic and it all happens?
For the most part, it's magic. There's a lot of magic. There are things, if you say you are like trying to relate data, let's say you have a blog post page, and then on that blog post page, you're like querying more blog posts.
Yep.
You need to keep in mind, like, the bigger the query, the longer it's going to take. If you're querying 1,000 blog posts, it's on one page, it's going to take longer. But still pretty darn fast. But for the most part, no. For initial builds, a lot of times where people will feel like they have some kind of problem is with what we call incremental builds. So incremental builds are builds when a data source updates. So static sites, the initial build is always something you look at, but what if when you publish a new blog post, how fast can that subsequent build be? So, I mean, we see them in the 5-second range, 5 to 10-second range, very, very fast when you have like really simple data structures. So sometimes imagine you have a blog post that queries the blog itself, but then maybe it queries like related blog posts or something. Well, then that query is going to take like slightly longer. But for the most part, you really don't have to worry about it. Especially when we're talking about builds in the seconds kind of range.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool. And I think the quote on a lot of the larger builds, reduction by 40%, which is massive.
So the query running step normally took up a large part of a build. So, you can reduce that by like 4 times, then you can save a lot of build time. And just like for context, for people that are listening that aren't familiar, maybe especially if you haven't used Gatsby since like Gatsby 2 or something, like how fast are these initial builds? I mean, we're seeing sites with 65,000 pages, like 2 million nodes in like the database building in like 20 minutes, and that's a pretty big site. Smaller sites, a minute or two, 1,000 pages, easily a minute. 10,000 pages. I've built a simple site that was 10,000 pages and it was like a minute and a half. So like it depends on the complexity of your data, how much media you're using. But for the vast majority of sites, your 5 to 10 minute range is probably on average for very rich, big sites even.
I love that you just called a simple site 10,000 pages.
I know, right? Like
it's not the New York Times.
I know we have people that are like, oh, Gatsby can't build sites. And they're like, all right, well, how big is your site? It's like 100,000 pages. It's like, well, Gatsby can do that now with some of the other things we'll talk about. But also keep in mind, for most agencies around the country and around the world, like 100,000 page site is like the 1% of the 1%. Like that is not the norm. For your average client that's coming in that wants to build something. They totally exist. You add in localization and some of these other things, logged in experiences. Yeah, it's totally possible, but I don't like to kid myself that that's like the only kind of website out there worth building,
Sorry, that totally makes sense. So I think this is a good segue into the kind of the second portion of those release notes that occurred, deferred static generation. And I do want to bring up a slide because I'm a huge visual person on this stuff. Let's see the best look here. So essentially, when we're talking about static site generation, I think a lot of people understand this, but just for a review, when we talk through this, when you hit a website and you hit a specific page, usually you're going to get that cache. So when Grayson's talking about like building out, you're actually creating those pages at build time. So it's generating those. And then when it gets all done, it's got a bunch of HTML and it loads it up to your CDN. So when it's out in the CDN and it's cached, the first time someone goes to hit it, it's already there. Like it's as close as possible to that person sitting on the CDN and it comes back to you. The cool new feature of deferred static generation is this picture, and I'll let Grayson kind of do the magic here, but there's kind of some cool stuff going on with this.
Yeah, this is like really cool. This was cool because I feel like we were really innovating here. So for some context, this is based on a pattern and a spec that Netlify put out under like the jamstack.org umbrella of something called DPR, which was just this new idea of how to change how to render on with the Jamstack. And so
distributed persisted rendering, right?
That's right. So this is like our best faith effort at implementing DPR. And I think maybe there's one other framework that has even tried this. But the idea is that you defer building the page until somebody asks for it. And then after that point, they get it from the cache, right? So the really great use case for this is, imagine you have 10,000 blog posts, but you've got like a third of them that get very little traffic. They haven't been hit in 3 months or something, right? So you can put some logic in your Gatsby file and say, if you can like read from your Google Analytics even, right? Or you can just look at the publish date to make this simpler, right? You can say, hey, anything over 5 years old, don't statically generate it, because it's adding to our build time, and we prefer faster builds, right? So those pages now are not being built with all the other ones ahead of time, but Gatsby is getting all the data necessary to build it, right? Saying, I'm not going to build it yet, but when you ask me for it, I'll know how to do it, right? So it puts that data up there in the cloud. And so then a week later, somebody actually wants that page for the first time. It wasn't statically generated, so it goes to the cache. There's nothing there. Then it goes to the Gatsby Cloud Worker, and the Gatsby Cloud Worker does the build step that it normally would have done with all those other thousands of pages, right? Like aggregated, but it does it for this one page and serves it up. And then it also gets put in the cache. So then visitor number 2, another week later, comes to that deferred page and it's in the cache, right? So it's really for helping unlock some more scale when the build times start to become, a bottleneck.
I think I'm a little more familiar with the next.js side of this. I think it's very similar. They call it incremental static generation, right?
That's right. The difference is it's based on time, and this is based on data. So and I'm not as familiar with the next one. Obviously I've used it, but it will basically, you set a cache timer on it. It's like, hey, every day or whatever, don't update it until then. So this says whenever the data updates, update that. Basically.
Interesting. So it's it's kind of looking in the background to see if something changed and then going. One of the biggest concerns I've heard over this is some of the SEO and the bots coming in. Is there a solution for that on this side of it?
Yeah, great question. So I'd have to know exactly what concern, but yeah, one of the concerns would be,
so like if Ahrefs or Google search is trying to like map out your entire site and this page doesn't really exist yet, when it comes in to hit that, does it actually do like a blocking state instead of like, oh, it's a cache miss? What's kind of the technique there for when that happens?
So there's a couple parts at play here, because you also have something called Gatsby link, which is it's like a link component that kind of looks ahead. So as one scrolls into view, it starts a low priority network request for that page that it sees. And then like as you hover, that jumps to a high priority network request. So by the time someone actually clicks on it, like the page is preloaded. So, theoretically, if you have a Gatsby link that goes to one of these DSG pages, like it would start requesting the page and therefore it would start getting built ahead of time. So there are some considerations, like you probably wouldn't want top level, your top level nav to have a bunch of deferred links. It wouldn't really make sense because they're just going to get built anyways, right? As for bots, like I don't know if there's an actual concern with like SEO content being missing. I think the concern would be more of like you said, it's if you're getting crawled a lot or something, it's just going to be generating these pages. But it's almost kind of nice if the bot, so that first page load is going to be slower, right? You're going to say, hey, I'm sacrificing one user's experience for the build time and for everyone else's to then get the static page, right? So if that first user is the bot, like that's great that they get the the slightly slower page load. But yeah, I mean there are some things to think about with like how you use this.
For sure. Yeah. I know on the next side, there's like a fallback essentially. So it can either pause your site and say, hey, I'm loading because it's got to go off and run that builder. And that's where the bot piece comes in. Instead of doing that fallback, it says, oh, this is a bot type coming in. I'll just do basically a server side render at that point and just load. And so it just waits for that block to occur and goes. But I didn't know if there was something similar.
I'd have to check with the cloud team if we've done anything specific on that. But one last note is that if you see on the far right of that diagram, it has Gatsby DB. So this is another thing that LMDB unlocked, right? So one was that we could run the queries in parallel, but the other is that the database can persist outside of the build now, right? Because so often it's like Gatsby has this amazing GraphQL server. And it normalizes and mixes all these data sources together in this amazing way, but it only exists during your build. And you're like, man, it'd be so cool if I could hit that same server at runtime.
Yeah. Right.
So we're not there yet, but this DSG is like the first step of showing like it's there, like it is getting used. It's not open for everyone to use yet, but like it shows you that this database now, this GraphQL like entity exists now outside of the build, which is super cool.
So would an example be like if you have an authors page, let's say, and the static generation occurred, so you have 5 authors, and then you go to add a 6th into the Gatsby DB side of that? Is that like live after it loads? Hey, a 6th one pops in. What's
right? The idea is that there's a lot of things you want to do at runtime. Then that you're having to weigh sometimes, like should I pull in the 5 related authors statically? I'd love to, like it's not crucial to SEO or whatever. I'd love to just query the Gatsby database, but oh man, the GraphQL server doesn't exist. So then I have to actually hit my CMS, which has like a different API shape, right? Like say you're using Contentful. If you're using the Contentful plugin in Gatsby, all those authors are in there like nice and clean. But then at runtime, if you want to interact with it, you have to use the Contentful API, which is, a slightly different shape. And it's a little annoying. And you're like, oh, all right, fine, I'll just do them statically. But then it's going to increase your build time. So this idea of like, well, what if your Gatsby GraphQL server could exist, past build time, and then you could use it. You could use it in your Gatsby app. You could use it wherever. So you could have, I don't know, any other kind of, say you have, some legacy code base that you maintain that needs access to that data. And you're like, oh man, imagine if our old logged in legacy experience could access the same GraphQL data that our new front end, like it lets you, the cool thing about the data layer is you are pulling in data from all these different sources and it feels like one data source.
That's cool.
So
if I'm hearing you right, you don't have to do a rebuild. You can actually continue to populate that. Is that correct?
It's still a rebuild.
Theoretically.
It's still, yeah, but so theoretically it's much less of a rebuild. Right? Because if you ever watch your Gatsby build process, you'll see how the first step, like the GraphQL server, is available like really, really quickly in the build process. So yeah, theoretically, if you had like a data update and you just wanted to update the GraphQL server, like that does not take long at all. What takes longer then is then you have to run the query, then you have to generate static HTML, then you have to generate JavaScript, then you have to generate CSS, you know. So there's like a lot of steps after the GraphQL generation. But so yeah, you would still do rebuild. There's all different levels of whether it's a data update or a code update or whatever that determine how much gets rebuilt.
Nice. Cool. So the third part of the major release, which you're gonna have to correct me on this one because I thought it was around longer, but in version 4, this is the first time SSR has come into play, server-side rendering.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, if you imagine that it's been there longer, it's probably just because people have been asking for it for a long time.
I know we first like walked away from Gatsby because of this, but that was a while ago when we switched to next.js for our site. So it's kind of interesting that I felt like it was there a lot longer now.
Yeah, and a lot of that was just wanting to make sure we did it right, knowing that we had these really big ideas for some other things. And so, but yeah, so it's basically an escape hatch, right? Like we really, really wanted to push ourselves on static. So I believe hands down, we do static better than anyone. You can build a static site faster with better performance with Gatsby than anything else. So I think if we had done a quicker SSR implementation, we wouldn't have pushed ourselves on the static front to make our static so fast, improve build times and query running and all these other things, because it would have felt like, oh, well, no, once you hit a little bottleneck, just go SSR, right? And so this is really meant for like, now this is happening, at the 75,000, 50,000, 100,000 type level of pages, number of pages, depending on how much media you're using and things like that. But I think that's a pretty good ceiling that leaves a lot of people in the box where they can use SSG comfortably. So this is really like an escape hatch for scale, right? This says, hey, we still believe like static first, but there are cases. Here's a great example of where we like SSR. So a lot of times people would build a Gatsby site that had like a logged in experience, right? Totally doable. You use client side routes and it just works. A lot of times those logged in users, they don't have SEO implications. They don't get a performance score. So dev team's kind of like, whatever, like, they see spinners for 5 seconds. They're already logged in. Like, the marketers don't see them. Right. So you can now easily make those pages SSR. So just, they don't get any spinners, loads a little bit faster than doing a client side, et cetera. So that's one use case. Another one is for just pure scale. So if you're e-commerce or your blogs, you can use the same logic in Gatsby. Like, all right, outside of a certain number or date or whatever, just SSR that page. So it's not going to be static, not going to be quite as fast on the front end, but it's not going to be impacting our build times anymore. So currently, this has a function like super similar to Next.js, like you export get server data, right? And then that gets injected in props. Inside there, you can do pretty much whatever you want. It's typically just some kind of fetch, but currently you can't interact with the data layer. So you do kind of have to say goodbye to the data layer to use SSR completely. But long-term, the goal is to be able to do that SSR. And because we've showed with DSG that database is up there, right? We can make it persist long-term. Then the goal would be to have SSR with the data layer, which would be great because I think the data layer is the best part about Gatsby. So, but yeah, SSR is there. Like, so now basically, if you're evaluating Next and Gatsby, it's probably, you're going to have like the same kind of architecture in the sense of like, we can choose which pages we do static, which pages we do SSR, and like nothing there is going to be any different.
Nice. Yeah, we talked pretty decent amount with Sam Bhagwat who's a co-founder of Gatsby, last season. I can't remember when it was now, probably like last January or something like that. And we were talking about the differences on how that looked and like what implications was in there for their content mesh and things like that. So for sure, if you're listening, check that out too. It's really interesting to kind of hear. I did want to bring up just the SSR side of things for people who aren't familiar again. I could be wrong, but is it slightly different than other implementations? It shows kind of where a cache missed the first time, and then the second cache miss, it actually sets a cache header in the CDN. Is that unique to Gatsby Cloud, or do you see that often?
I'd have to actually ask one of the cloud engineers. I'm not sure what that might be referring to.
Okay.
Let's see.
I was kind of curious if it's still hitting that CDN piece on there, since it shows CDN response there.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that's referring to. That might be something unique to the actual hosting, the hosting platform for Gatsby Cloud.
Nice.
I had a question on the data layer too. Why did Gatsby choose to use GraphQL, and is there any future option to use REST, or is there an option to use REST?
You'd have to check with Kyle and Sam on why they chose GraphQL, but it's such a great question because I didn't know any GraphQL before I started using Gatsby. And if you're listening to this and you want to learn GraphQL, I hands down believe that Gatsby is the best tool for like a front-end developer to dip their toe into GraphQL, right? Because you start with queries only, right? You're just reading data and you're learning a little bit about like how you name a query in GraphQL and how the fields work, right? And then you learn a little bit about fragments, right? Of, repeating a set of fields. And then you start to get curious and you're like, all right, well, how is this working? Or what if I want to change what a field is returning? Or what if I want to relate two nodes in GraphQL? How do I do this? And then you learn about directives, and then you learn, you're learning about GraphQL types and resolvers and all this stuff. And using Gatsby's like deeper GraphQL APIs, you can go as far into GraphQL as you want. And like now I've done like full, fully typed GraphQL servers with, with TypeScript and mutations and subscriptions and everything, right? Like, but it all started with me just giving some basic queries in GraphQL with Gatsby. So as far as using REST, one thing to like keep in mind is that the GraphQL part is what's presented to the developer as you're building the site. But what's presented to Gatsby can be anything, and it turns it into GraphQL. So all of these plugins like Contentful and WordPress and Drupal, they're all interacting with different types of API. So you could write you could interact with like a SOAP API and turn it into a Gatsby plugin that turns it into GraphQL. Like people use the file system. You read Markdown, you read JSON. I wrote like a CSV one time, like just to read CSV, and it turns it into GraphQL nodes. So that's my favorite part about the data layer is when you're interacting with it, you have no idea where that data actually came from, right? It could be coming from, who knows what. A lot of them do come from GraphQL now because they like the idea of sharing a schema between the backend and Gatsby. But yeah, most of them are interacting with some kind of REST API. You just don't see it as the Gatsby developer, as the front end developer. You just see the GraphQL part.
Yeah, I have to be honest. When I first learned Gatsby, I was learning React too, and it all started to kind of meld together. And I'm like, this is so confusing. Why am I getting data and then having to produce data out to GraphQL again? Why do I have to learn this other thing? But as you kind of go through that and you start to mesh together different data points and things, you can start to see the power of GraphQL for sure. But there's a little bit of a learning curve if you haven't done GraphQL and a different mindset too. Like, if you go from like a normal database kind of layer, or just having data in the application to be able to get like that data just into a page, you now need to like make it a GraphQL piece. And it was super challenging for me at first to understand that. So if you're just getting into Gatsby and just kind of learning what it is, be patient with that part, I would say. And really dive in and try to understand how that data makes it from the data layer into the actual Gatsby page itself. or
Yeah, yeah,
the
it
JS
is.
side?
It is a different way of thinking about it. I mean, most frameworks you have to do something to like you have to fetch the data somehow to get it into your templates. Even outside of React, you got to have some kind of loader, and so yeah, Gatsby just tries to make that like a uniform way, but it is a different way of thinking about it.
For sure. Cool. So there's been, I think that's probably the big notes. One thing I did want to ask, when we're talking about like kind of the build side of things and the parallel query running, we were just talking to the people over at Astro, and they were talking how they use Go for their build tools, but they use Node.js to kind of like send over signals to
Yeah.
use that. Is there anything, and I would say next.js just switched to Rust. Is there anything kind of in the works at Gatsby that you know of for improving these tools even further?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the developer tooling world right now is moving very quickly away from some of the compile your JavaScript with JavaScript tools to like compile your JavaScript with anything but JavaScript, right? So compile your CSS with Go and do everything with Rust. Like, yes, we're constantly evaluating which parts of our build chain can be faster. So we rely on a whole host of different open source libraries. Like, so now LMDB is like a big part of ours that technically would have moved from a JavaScript tool to a non-JavaScript tool. And we saw like we said, huge gain. So we're always looking at like which parts, we are still like heavily based on Webpack. So it wouldn't be like an overnight thing of where we're able to safely eject from that without a lot of plugins rely on certain Webpack APIs. So like we would have to have a lot of communication ahead of time. We don't want to, break somebody's, the plugin ecosystem along the way. But yeah, definitely we've got our eye on a couple of different tools of that we could swap in.
Nice. No, it's really exciting. I will say I love how Gatsby puts so much into their release notes and kind of what's changed and what's coming up. So huge props for that, because I can kind of somewhat keep up even though I'm not over there. And our site's in Next.js now. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't be somewhere else in the future. So I'm always checking it out and trying to see where things are trending and heading. So
yeah, they do a great job, and that's where I go back to like late 2.0. We really had a big shift in making sure that the releases were quality and controlled and easy to follow.
I know we talked about kind of the different ways of doing rendering. So whether it's static or server side, and React kind of has this big thing coming up where there's like server side components and being able to stream. Do you see that as part of Gatsby's future, or is that something that's just like, it's probably too far out there?
No, 100% part of the future. Yeah, the React working group is nice enough to have some folks from Gatsby as members to help inform and stay a part of, the server, whether it's server components or suspense, and all the other long awaited React features. But yeah, that has big implications for runtime performance. So essentially less JavaScript for the components. The components that don't need JavaScript won't bring it along for the ride. So should also have positive implications for our build speeds as well. So I feel like like I said, we've worked so hard on making our static the best that it can be, that some of these things that are coming out, like non-JavaScript based JavaScript tooling and React 18, it's just going to be like, the cherry on top of a lot of the other engineering stuff we've done under the hood that was like, squeezing as much, juice from the lemon as we could. And then be like, oh, actually we have like all this other amazing stuff that's going to, take you leaps and bounds further. So super excited about that stuff too, actually. I think it's in beta now. So React 18. So
Yeah,
we've got flags. You can run Gatsby with React 18 now. You won't have like all the server component stuff that requires, my understanding, like your own implementation of like how are you going to handle the server component. And then same with suspense. Like I think suspense might just work, but there's things you could do to it should help with some rehydration stuff and performance and things like that. So that will definitely be part of Gatsby.
Awesome. I'm not as familiar on the company side, the Gatsby cloud piece. Is it only hosting and running Gatsby, or can you like spin up an Angular site and throw it on there?
No, it's Gatsby. It's Gatsby
Okay.
only. Gatsby builds and Gatsby hosting. So
not comparative probably to like Vercel or Net. I almost said Netflix.
Yeah.
Netlify, on there where they can host like practically anything. This is very focused for Gatsby itself.
Yep, exactly. So we, like I said, we are big fans of Netlify and Vercel. Like they've done a lot to help support the Gatsby ecosystem. We have lots of Gatsby cloud clients that still rely on them for other things. And so a lot of times folks that are building, lots of different types of client sites and, like they're like, all right, they just want like one place to do it. And it does it all pretty well. I like to say that some of these build platforms are like Swiss Army knife, like you can build and host anything, but Gatsby Cloud is a scalpel that's made for Gatsby sites. Like it does Gatsby
Good
sites.
Analogy.
Yeah, it does Gatsby sites faster and better than anyone. And that's just because, we can do all kinds of optimizations and things very specific to Gatsby builds that other platforms, they might not find the time worthwhile to invest in those kinds of engineering changes. So
awesome. Great. Well, I think at this time we're going to shift over and do our perfect picks. And Grayson was kind enough to add some fun ones. Let me bring it up here. So tell me all about this one, Grayson.
Okay. Yeah. So I was telling them before the show, I caved this year and caved into video games in the household. So got the kids a Switch, Nintendo Switch for Christmas. And, you look up what are the best games to get, and we got Zelda Breath of the Wild here. And the last video game system I owned was an N64. I think it was a Donkey Kong version, so this game is like pretty amazing. I have not played a lot of video games in a long time. And so I've had a good time with the kids playing, Mario Kart and Zelda with them. So that's been fun.
I think there's a lot of talk of Breath of the Wild 2 showing up hopefully fairly soon. So you guys will have to play this one quick.
Yeah, they were telling me like they're already Breath of the Wild 2. I'm like, dang, I just bought this thing and now apparently there's more money I need to spend, but that's fine.
My son and I were addicted to the first one, so it's totally a great game. Your second pick, a little more technical.
Yeah, and I kind of want to throw an audible and change here. I put Node 17, by the way. I feel like Node in the last few years has just done a great job with their releases. Some people might say it's moving too fast or whatever, but some of the things, like having fetch within Node and some of these things are just so nice to have for the ecosystem. But I want to throw React 18 out there. So
I can Google that quick.
If anyone on the React 18 working group is listening to this, put me in the column of I'm ready. I'm ready for this.
There's so many people in the ready column for that.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
I'm ready for server components and excited about this. But yeah, I mean, shout out to the React team as well. I know they have to get input from, lots of people in the community with different motives and ideas.
It's just so massive. Breaking React would be just horrible.
It's so massive, and I feel like at the end of the day they've done a good job, of balancing, of just waiting to do it right. Kind of like us with SSR and some of our features. I think we could have done SSR 2 years ago, but I don't think it would have fit in as well with the strategy that we have now of doing it right. So, but I am excited about React 18. Yes.
Awesome. Good pick. Brittany, you're up next.
Yeah, my first pick, I just wanted to give a shout out to our friends over at Syntax FM, and they did a Gatsby version 4 rundown kind of the changes, and Wes uses it on his site. So I thought it was a good episode, short and quick. I think it's less than 30 minutes. It's a hasty treat.
Hasty. We gotta get fun names.
I know, it's so fun.
I don't know what we're doing. Your second one, I think this is the right link, I hope.
That is the right link, and it may look a little foreign because it is in German. It's a German conference called Inter.js, and it's a JavaScript conference that's going to be in March. I'm doing a talk on building design systems with SvelteKit. It's 45 minutes and it's live, and I'm very nervous, but trying to promote it.
Did you brush up on your German?
I don't speak German. So I hope they know that. And I hope they know I will be doing it in English. I think that's pretty common there. Most people know English, which is amazing that I think all these other countries like learn all these languages. And here in the States, we kind of fall behind on that a little bit, but.
Nice. Good pick. Or what do we call these picks and
picks and plugs?
Plugs. Good plug. There we
go. That's what press does.
Yeah. Similar to Grayson, I actually broke down and somehow found a Xbox Series X. I jokingly said to my son, we were walking in a Meijer, and I said, if you want to go over there and see if they have one, I'll buy it. Just because I knew no one had it. And the guy goes, if you go get your dad, I'll get one out of the back. And they had one. I'm like,
wow.
Why did I say this? But now I'm kind of addicted. So Halo Infinite, I am playing too often. So I've probably lost a lot of my creativeness at night, unfortunately, because I've been hooked. It's amazing. My first video game in college and console was the Xbox and Halo. So it's come a long ways. The new machine is ridiculous. Like it's
so this brings back memories because like I said, my last console was an N64. But I had a roommate in college that had an Xbox 360, I guess, something. But it was Halo 3 was it. Back in the day. And I saw an article, I think this week, that like they're about to end of life the Halo 3 servers, and I was like, oh, that must be like the really old Halo. And I looked at the pictures, I was like, oh my god, that's the Halo I played in college. Like, and they're shutting it all down. So.
It's pretty amazing. I think they're like a lot of that they're keeping around. Similar N64 and the Switch, they're bringing a lot of those games back. Just the nostalgia around them. It's so popular.
Yeah,
I'm not a huge gamer, but there's certain games like Zelda and Halo that I just get addicted to.
Yeah, same. Like the kids play like Smash Brothers. I'm not a huge.
Exactly.
I love that.
My son just whoops me on that. I'm like, whatever. I don't have the time to figure out every key. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But I told them earlier, I've got 5 kids, and with all the stuff I have to do every day, video games just they don't have a lot of time. So I've never been a big gamer.
Nice. My second pick, more of a technical pick, 11D just dropped version 1. We were just talking with the Astro folks, and I kept messing up that they were going to version 1. In my head, I got it mixed up because my pick was 11D going to version 1. So it's kind of interesting. They've really locked in. I still haven't fully used. I've messed around with 11D and checked out the templating and things like that. I haven't used it for a full site, but it looks like it's something solid now. Like if you want,
I've never used it, and I had no idea it wasn't out of beta.
Yeah. I mean, they've always called it like decent releases, I think, but this is the first stable
major release. Wow.
I don't know if that means they'll maintain this forever going forward or what that looks like, but how it goes.
I think that the creator works for Netlify now.
Okay.
And so I think that helps with being able to.
Who's the creator?
Zach Leatherman.
Okay.
So yeah, 11T's great. It's one of the more.
It says he works at Netlify.
Yeah, low JS, right? I think the idea, same with Astro. Like the idea is that
makes sense then, right, that Jason Langsdorff just moved his site from Toast over to 11D.
Oh no more Toast.
Well, he's just wasn't taking the power of Preact and React. He said so. Moving it to 11D made sense, I guess.
Makes sense.